Hey, folks, it's Ed from the scenic middle of nowhere in Vermont. Quick note before we get started. Sorry about the lateness of getting this one out. I have very little internet, and Christmas kind of does that anyway. Anyway, the audio in this one is a little bit crispy, but we will get that sorted out for the mailbag next week. Speaking of, you should go submit questions for the mailbag by Sunday. Go to golikehellmachine.com and submit your questions now. All right, on to the show.
This is Normal Men, a podcast from four men who are clinging desperately to normalcy in an era when that's asking a bit too much. I'm George in Charlotte.
In DC, I'm Proctor Malone.
In outer Florida, I'm low-tax speedrun enjoyer.
And I'm Ed in Boston.
Yeah, we'll get canceled immediately if we tell anyone we use AI to up the sound on this thing.
Forget video games, podcasts. All right, I want to make one thing clear. We do not respect OpenAI in this house.
No. It's a hard no from us, dog.
Really would have thought Grok would be the AI of choice for CBP.
How does that work in court? Like, if you, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a hypothetical where I'm a CBP agent and I just completely, my whole report is just output from an LLM. Does that all get taken as my statement, or can it be thrown out, or like what's going on there?
We will find out. We are in totally uncharted territory.
Whenever a lawyer says we will find out, you know you're in for an either very, very good or very, very bad time.
I mean, this just appeared in the excessive force case here. So like the tear gas case, there's a footnote that says that there's body cam footage of one of the officers using ChatGPT to create his report in the field. That's as far as we've gotten. I think we are in whole new territory. We don't know what a court's going to do.
Well, and they can't use Grok because, they have to lobotomize Grok like every 3 weeks or so because he keeps learning to be woke again.
This is true, actually. Grok exhibits liberal tendencies and then gets put away for re-education on an alarmingly regular basis.
Yeah, they're all going like, Grok, can you write me a report on this ice bust we just did? And Grok is like, so they racially profiled these guys, threw them in a bus.
So the voice you don't recognize here is Mark Fleming of the National Immigrant Justice Center and longtime friend of the pod. He's joining us from Chicago, where he's had a front seat to some of the recent developments in immigrant justice, so to speak. He also does a great deal of work in both appellate law and appellate strategy for the good guys on immigration law. So welcome to the pod, Mark.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
See, I thought you were going to say that the voice that you don't recognize on this podcast is Proctor Malone.
Yeah, I also have returned from my vacation and re-education and hopefully now sound like myself again. So rather than like Scott Stapp, was that what we settled on?
I think that was the one, yeah.
I was trying to be nice about the barbecue sauce, but low tax.
No, we said you normally sound like Scott Stapp. Last week we had Kurt Cobain, though.
Oh. Yeah, this isn't working to my advantage.
That was low tax speedrun enjoyer.
Low tax speedrun enjoyer. So, Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about what the NIJC does and then a little bit about what you do before we get into the more specific horrors of the current environment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the National Immigrant Justice Center, we've been around for at least 30 years now, but goes back to some of the welcoming houses in Chicago for travelers, during the migrations in the early 20th century. There's kind of a direct lineage to our organization. But what we are is we are probably the largest provider of direct representation to immigrants, certainly in the Midwest. But then as part of that, so we represent them in detained court, in non-detained court, in family petitions, asylum, U visas, which is a special visa for people who are victims of violent crime, any of the kind of humanitarian visas plus family visas we do. And we serve 10,000 immigrants every year. But then from what our experiences of our clients on the direct rec cases inform both our policy work and then our litigation work. And I work mostly in the strategic litigation space, typically around enforcement and detention issues in immigration. And so, we take the experiences that our clients have had, the trends that we're seeing there, to kind of inform what sorts of cases and where we think litigation can play a meaningful role in improving, whatever situation is unfolding or whatever policy is unfolding. And then, as separate from that, we do a lot of policy work, both at the federal and local and state level. Over the years, I've done a lot on sanctuary laws, was heavily involved in the sanctuary laws in Chicago, in Illinois, and frankly, many of the quote unquote sanctuary laws around the country. I played a pretty formal hand in a lot of the technical assistance to legislators.
So part of what you guys do is as an umbrella organization sweeping up individual immigration cases, you're in kind of a unique position to see developments in what's happening in immigration courts.
Yes.
Obviously, it's a slow couple of years for you guys. So, are there any long-term projects you're working on, or?
So one of the main projects that really has taken up vast majority of our time this year is a case called Castino-Nava v. DHS. And what that was a class action lawsuit that we filed in 2018 when border czar Tom Homan was then acting ICE director. And in the spring of 2018, did a lot of large-scale raids in blue cities. You haven't caught the theme here. We're seeing a reprieve of this, or a repeat of this in this administration, second Trump administration. In particularly focused on jurisdictions that had quote unquote sanctuary laws. And sanctuary laws, really what it means is not participating in civil immigration enforcement. But that's the responsibility of the federal government. And as state and local law enforcement, have other, we want to have trust with our communities and, be able to focus on local issues and not on immigration. And want to make sure that all, members of the community can come forward if they are the witnesses or victims of crime. So in the spring of 2018, in a nationwide operation that went from city to city called Operation Keep Safe, they came into Chicago and did a large-scale raid in which what has always been one of the playbooks is you have a small list of targeted individuals, typically people who have prior orders of removal or for one reason or another have had some sort of recent interaction with the criminal justice system. Not even necessarily people that would be quote unquote dangerous or have serious criminal background, but people that are identifiable to them and that they can find easily in the community, and then using that as pretext to then go out and then anyone else they run into sweep them up. And so we sued, claiming that all those collateral arrests, that's the euphemism or the term they use, is the people, the unknown people that they run into. We sued them saying, this violates your limited warrantless arrest authority. Under immigration law, they do not have the same sort of warrantless arrest authority that you might think of in the criminal system. They need to, in addition to probable cause of the person's violation of immigration law, they also need to have probable cause that the person's likely to escape before a warrant could be obtained. And what both, immigration agency law, going back to the INS, so going back prior to ICE, and case law has always said is if somebody has community ties, has a family, a home, employment, those are all indices that they can be found back in the community and you go make an arrest with a warrant.
Right.
And what we saw during those raids was, like we're seeing now, is large-scale violation. And so kind of one of the long-term projects there was to set up a consent decree to get them back into line with the law as to their authorities.
And particularly as you've seen an enforcement focus shift to people who do have, community ties going back decades, that has to be something that they're running into more often. That these are not mobile people that they're kidnapping these days. These are people who have families. Their kids go to school. They've got extended family in the area. These are people for whom you should almost always have to get a warrant. But
yes,
but the collateral arrest portal here allows a different mechanism for them to go after and pursue.
Yeah, I mean, what they're doing is instead, because it's not efficient for them, they're brazenly violating the law. I mean, at this point, under Operation Midway Blitz, I believe there are probably 3,000 to 4,000 arrests, of which a couple thousand of them are violations of the consent decree.
Oof.
In the spring of this year, when they started to ramp up enforcement, we filed a motion to enforce, saying that they're repeatedly and materially violating this. We need remedies that are broader than what we originally agreed to and get it extended. And the court, just here in October, recently granted our extension through February and has granted us a lot of additional reporting requirements so that we can start to try and identify who these people are that have been picked up through Operation Midway Blitz, which literally has been in the thousands. And based on the data that we've gotten so far, to brazen violations, not only of our consent decree, but of the law.
So the consent decree is still in effect, but you guys are tussling through the court over to what degree you can enforce. And you don't even have anything like a centralized list of these are the people that we've taken from Chicago.
Not yet. So a couple things. One is there's an amazing network of people here. We have a rapid response network of literally hundreds of Chicagoans that have divided up the city, in which we have a central hotline in which people can call when people are arrested or they see ICE, and then people go out to the scene where it is, both to film it, but also to identify loved ones. And through that process, we've been able to identify at least 1,500 people that way alone. Separately from that, the government has produced multiple lists to us. We have two lists, that one of arrests before October 7, which totals 3,300, and a list of after October 7, which totals close to 1,300. And so kind of combining those two.
October 7 is when they kicked off Operation Midway Blitz.
No, so October 7 is when the court made his ruling. And so Operation Midway Blitz technically kicked off on September 8th. And I mean, it's technically still ongoing as Mr. Bavino, Gregory Bavino, the commander at large of Border Patrol, who made a 48-hour appearance here this week in Chicago again. But effectively, things started to die down a little bit, starting around November 12th, November 13th, say. So basically, there's kind of a 2-month period.
And that's when Bovino and the Skullcracking Squad left. We've talked about Bovino on this podcast a number of times. That's when they left town.
Yeah, they decided to take a picture in front of the Bean. If folks know Chicago, it's kind of the famous kind of bean sculpture with kind of beautiful reflections of the city. All of his agents showed up there at 5 a.m. to take a photo. And instead of saying cheese or some other word, they used Little Village as their like smile word. And Little Village is a very famous Mexican immigrant community here in Chicago. So just the ugliness with which they're operating. I'm talking about violations, but like the level of violence, aggressiveness, and lack of basic human dignity with which they operate has been just jaw-dropping. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years that I've done this work.
Yeah, they revel in their ugliness.
They do. They really do.
In your experience with the different circumstances in terms of detentions, arrests, etc., are you seeing a big difference between the various agencies? Because one of the things that sort of appears to be true is that CBP are the most off-the-chain group of feds wandering around, and then there's a spectrum beneath them. Do you think that's true? Do you think, what's it like for someone encountering ICE versus CBP? Is that something you can speak to based on what you've seen in Chicago?
Yes. I mean, I think they are by far the most lawless. And one of the characteristics with which they operate is, so one of the tactics often is they'll go in a caravan of unmarked SUVs, typically with probably 15 to 20 officers in them. They're in full military tactical gear. They have high-powered rifles. Their entire front chest is full of chemical munitions and flashbang grenades. They're masked. They have, what you would imagine in a military caravan. And when they go out, they'll often, it's like a shock and awe sort of arrest tactic in which they will cut off a vehicle, cut off a parking lot, and all the officers come out and form a perimeter around whoever the poor people who are in the middle, who often, frankly, are, under the law would be considered under arrest without probable cause before there's even any questioning going. And then what ends up happening is, because of the show of force and the agitation and the fear that they're creating, and frankly, the provocation, you start to have, a crowd form. And that often then leads to confrontations with the officers. And many times, even if there is no provocation from the people that form, they will often throw tear gas on the way out, or a flashbang grenade, or point their guns at people in ways that are just, I don't want to sanitize other law enforcement. Law enforcement has a kind of a deep, ugly history in the United States, but I think any law enforcement agency would be kind of shocked and frankly do not operate on a day-to-day basis the way that I have seen Border Patrol operate here in Chicago. Now, comparing that to ICE certainly has the mask. They certainly have, the bulletproof vest, but and they do come out and profile. They have been profiling, for example, landscaping trucks or any sort of construction sort of vehicles. They certainly have been doing that profile. But what I will say is it's way less confrontation than what you see from Border Patrol. Now, I think it's morphine. I think the fact that a number of the top people at ICE are starting to get sacked for people in Border Patrol is sending a very strong signal that what is approved by the administration is the Border Patrol tactics. And so, just as an example, I think, the vast majority of tear gassing and other chemical munition encounters in Chicago were by Border Patrol. Soon after they left, there was an encounter with ICE here, in which one of the first times I feel like I've seen where ICE has been now throwing tear gas and other munitions. And so I guess I'm concerned that they're all trending that way, but without a doubt, Border Patrol, and particularly Bavino, is highly encouraging this. So just kind of give an idea that there's a processing center in Southwest Chicago where when people get arrested, this is usually where they go. And this is where a lot of protests have been, and there's some division there.
It's where Kat Abu got body slammed, right?
Correct. And where another pastor, a gentleman, Pastor Black, got shot in the neck with a pellet or a pepper ball. The number of times I've seen videos, and there apparently is long videos of that facility, and the number of times the provocation has been completely by Border Patrol coming out and doing a show of force to rile up the crowd and then use chemical weapons against them. It's really disconcerting, to say the least.
So what does the local and state response be like, right? Because obviously they can't do much, really anything in most of these cases to CBP, ICE, et cetera. But some of this is a public safety hazard. And obviously Pritzker has come out very loudly against Trump and all of this bullshit at various points. So what does it look like there from the official side?
I mean, so from the official side, I think as you raise, there's very significant limitations of what they can and cannot do. I think in some ways they took on some of the responsibility of trying to keep a perimeter between protesters and ICE, at least at Broadview. I think that, is obviously controversial, understandably, but in light of the fact that you have federal agents wanting to create violence, it seemed like something that he may have to do. They've set up a state accountability commission to just kind of gather, not all that different from like the January 6th commission, even if there's significant limitations on what a state can do to prosecute or anything of that nature, at least document what has been happening. And then I think that the last piece is certainly the Attorney General's office has done everything in their power to push back, one, on the threats to the sanctuary laws, but also to make sure that, we have the most extensive protections possible at the state and local level. And then, working with us, in communication about what they're seeing and whether there are openings for us as, nonprofit organizations and civil rights organizations to fill in the gap that where they, frankly, unfortunately cannot sue on behalf of their on behalf of their citizens or residents. So, I mean, just as an example, just this last session, we have a thing called veto session, which is like a 5-day small legislative session. During that, they passed legislation curbing the ability of them to make arrests at courthouses, at hospitals, at daycare centers, really trying to fill in the gaps of what were already really robust laws. And, as much effort as they have put into Chicago in making arrests, it still does not compare to the time period when local law enforcement were fully cooperating. And so just depriving them of those resources and that manpower has been absolutely critical.
So obviously the feds, the Trump administration, really, really hates sanctuary policies. That's something that they've demagogued against on a number of occasions. The social science on that looks pretty good. Cop organizations seem to like those on a local basis. That the effect has been, I think, pretty positive from where I'm standing in terms of both allowing local law enforcement to do their jobs, in terms of improving relationships between immigrant communities and increasing access to the justice system all around. Is it your sense that the feds are getting traction with trying to get places to roll back sanctuary policies, or are these holding up pretty well?
My sense is they're generally holding up pretty well. It particularly seeing what they are doing here, I think it's plain as day to any Chicagoan who's been following the news that they are not going after individuals who've had any significant interactions with the criminal justice system. It's just simply not the case. And instead, it's folks that have been here, 10, 20, 30 years, have families, have had no interaction with law enforcement, have businesses, are members of their church, really upstanding members of the community, and also just the social fabric of this city that I think people deeply, deeply resent them being here and see us under attack. And if anything, I think it's backfired, at least here locally, backfired as far as getting rollback, because it's obvious that this is not about, it's not as if they would stop doing this if, Chicago rolled back a portion of their sanctuary laws. It's just, it's clear as day that they are wanting to do this, plus have the cooperation of Chicago or whatever other municipality or law enforcement agency.
There's also just whenever you have a situation where you're detaining large numbers of people, you are going to create the conditions for very bad things to happen. Even giving ICE, CBP, federal law enforcement the absolute best possible benefit of the doubt around who they're detaining, which you shouldn't do, but even doing so, if you throw people into a confinement, you're going to create risky situations. There was a Bulgarian man who died recently because he was diabetic and was not given the care that he needed to continue living. He was perfectly healthy other than, he was perfectly managed his disease outside of detention. But when you start putting people in cages, you very frequently create conditions where people that have otherwise manageable conditions just die. And I mean, it's not really hard to frame that as not different from murder. I think the more of those sorts of stories we see, the more that blowback intensifies too. And thankfully, it does appear to be looking like that in the polling. I mean, maybe not as much as we would hope, but certainly at the margin.
It certainly does. And I feel like, one of the things that I think has been somewhat underreported about their strategy here is, let's just use Chicago as like a microcosm. They're making unlawful arrests in the community, but then they are subjecting these individuals to what's referred to as mandatory detention, where they're not eligible for bond. The vast majority of these people, under how we've interpreted the laws, literally going back to 1952 when they passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, like core immigration law, had the vast majority of the people that have been arrested, say in Chicago or in any of these large scale raids, are eligible for bond. In July, on July 8th, the administration came out with a new interpretation of the statute, in which they have now recategorized all these people as subject to mandatory detention. And that is why we have over 65,000 detention. The vast majority of these people are eligible for bond. They broke from 30 years of interpretation of the statute and have now, I believe it's over 300 different district court judges have taken habeas on this issue. And 300 district court judges, almost half of all district court judges in the United States, have ruled against the administration on this issue. And yet, up until very, very recently, the administration was purposely not appealing any of those losses. And the reason being is if they appeal it, then, other immigrants would benefit from it. So think of the birthright citizenship case from last year when we were talking about universal injunctions. Literally a lot of the discussion between the justices of what happens if you don't appeal? Will you follow the law is exactly what is happening this year in immigration, because literally the vast majority of these people in detention are eligible for bond and would have gotten out on very low bonds, reunited with their family, be able to get an attorney, fight their case. Many of them, because they've been here so long, have many options. But instead, what's happening is those people are then getting stuck in a place called Broadview here in Chicago, for example. As George, you were flagging, the conditions there are horrible. People have had to get emergency medical care in there. There's no food. There's no showers. There's no beds in that facility. And what they've been doing is delaying people being placed into immigration and saying, just sign this paper. This is the only way out. And it's basically a self-deportation document. It's called voluntary departure. There's nothing voluntary about it, but that's what it's called. And it has been shocking the number of people who have given up and have taken voluntary departure because of this illegal scheme that they've developed. So for this class action I was mentioning, for we probably have a couple thousand violations. They gave us an original list of arrests that had 1,800 people. By the time we got the list, maybe 3 weeks after, we got it on October 22nd. It was the arrest before October 7th. Okay. By the time we got the list on October 22nd, there was only 600 people left of that 1,800. Over 60% of the people had given up. And yet they lots of their arrests were violations of this consent decree, should have gotten out under this consent decree, and lots of those people should have gotten out on a low bond, somewhere between $1,500 and $4,000. But instead, they gave up and are now effectively permanently separated from their family.
That is heavy. I mean, is it so obviously there's kind of a multi-level campaign of terror that's happening through the immigration system against Americans, against American residents here. And it sounds like that prong at least is effective, that once they get you into the detention system, then that's a big enough lever to get a lot of people to sign away the rights that they have, leave the country, and at that point they are legally prohibited from coming back.
At least for a decade, yes. They have like a 10-year bar.
From Trump's perspective, that's forever, right? Like,
and frankly, for most of those people, it is.
Is it your sense that the other tiers of terror are having a similar effect? I mean, are there people who are not being, are there significant numbers of people who are not being directly detained, who are looking at the news, looking at these reports and saying, well, time to go? Or are communities kind of digging in and hanging on?
That one's a little bit harder to fully get a macro sense of. There's certainly discussion, without a doubt, of I want to be able to go on my terms. I don't want to, suddenly get swooped up. And I mean, quite literally suddenly swooped up. Some of these arrests with Border Patrol here, they pull over, say, a person's vehicle, they arrest them, they leave the car running on the side of the road with the person's license, their credit cards, all of their belongings in there. Leave the car there. And it's our rapid response networks that are working with the city to retrieve that vehicle to take to, family or whatever. People where kids have been left in the back of a vehicle as their parent is arrested. So those scenarios, yes, they have a very profound impact on people. I don't get the sense that it's people giving up in droves. I mean, not surprisingly, because their lives are here often. When we're talking about here in Chicago, these are families that have been here 20, 30 years. They don't even know Mexico anymore. And it's not just Mexico, but Chicago has a very, very, very big Mexican population, and they are deeply rooted, some legal, some not, but who have been here decades. So they are from generations ago. But are people terrified? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. The level of trauma that this administration has, perpetrated in the communities here in Chicago is, I can't even put, words to that. I think all Chicagoans are who've been paying attention and certainly targeted communities. I don't know how you aren't harmed by and somehow impacted by what they've done over the last couple months.
Do you have a sense for what the limits are logistically in this campaign? I mean, the private sector estimates I've seen of the number of beds ICE can put detained people in is maybe 80,000, 75,000, 80,000. You could probably get up to 100,000. And this is literally from a management team in the private prison industry. Probably get up to 100,000 if you use stuff like soft side facilities and military bases, that sort of thing. I mean, they must be getting relatively close to the point where they don't have a place to put these people, right? Just in terms of the sheer number of detentions we've seen so far. So obviously they've gotten a lot of funding through Congress, and they're doing a lot to reallocate funding as well. But that takes time. Building buildings takes time. It's just a simple fact. So what's the plan here? How can they sustain this pace of detentions if they only have that many beds?
It's a great question. I think one aspect of it certainly has been to try and churn people out. So get people to take voluntary departure, and in many cases, even incentivize them, give them $1,000 on the way out, often in a credit card that they can't use in their home country. These sorts of shenanigans.
Sorry, is that legal? Is doing that on inducement like that legal?
Define legal.
You're asking this goes back to the chat GPT. They are testing the boundaries of all of this. This is Let
me reframe the question then. Has there ever been a program to induce people to self-deport using? Okay.
No, not to use funding. No, absolutely. This is in a lot of ways, this isn't that different than the fork in the road, which is, the fork in the road for government employee. was that legal? I think we've never seen anything like that. It seems like Congress didn't allocate, gift cards to immigrants on the way out. But I mean, I don't know how many people are actually taking that. I think more often than not, it's really the threat of being in detention and being treated like a criminal for the first time in your life that has had a very profound impact on people to give up. But to your question about the long-term strategy, I mean, what's interesting is I hadn't seen that analysis, but it maybe explains one of the trends we've seen, which is they have started to contract with state correctional systems in a way that they never used to. So historically in immigration, you would have county jails, which often were smaller. You would have the private prisons, the large-scale private prisons that were pretty much exclusively just for immigration. And then you would have a handful of facilities that were owned by ICE. In the last year, there's been at least 3 large-scale contracts with, underutilized state prison facilities. And I'm wondering whether that is being accounted for or not. So I'm just as one example, there's a facility called the Miami Correctional Facility not here in Illinois, in Indiana, which is a maximum security prison that they are now going to hold immigrants in. Immigrants who have no criminal background are now going to be held in maximum security conditions at this facility. And they have, currently it's like 300 beds there, but with the option of up to 3,000 beds in that facility, for example. And so I'm wondering whether, as we see prison populations drop, whether in certain localities that may be where some of the makeup is. But I mean, it's a fair point. Like, to reach the numbers that this administration wants to deport, it's hard to see how that can be done.
There have to be significant price tags associated with this also, right? Like, you can't, it's not cheap to incarcerate people in a maximum security facility.
Yeah.
It is not cheap to set up a separate pipeline for immigration detainees at a maximum security facility.
Do you know how much they're paying per bed at Miami Correctional Facility? $297 per bed per day.
Oof.
You could put them up at a nice hotel in Indianapolis for that price per night. I mean, it's insane. I mean, the amount, and these are folks that have no criminal. There is no need for it. It's shocking. It's the amount of money they're blowing. Leave aside inhumanity with how they're doing it, but it's just really it's crazy the ways that they're spending this money.
$325 million a year at the full option is that's bananas.
Crazy.
And the other thing, we haven't really talked about this a ton. We've mentioned a couple of times, but Mark, you're right to point out, as prison populations fall, prison populations are falling because violent crime spiked during the pandemic, but has now resumed its decades-long descent. And you can kind of only find so many people to throw in prison if you have sustained declines in violent crime. And that's a nationwide trend. It's happening everywhere. So we did this massive prison build out in the 1990s and 2000s, and oops, turns out we don't have enough bodies to put into those prisons because people aren't murdering each other as much. I'm still murdering each other a lot, but not as much as they were. And so what do you have to do? Especially, by the way, if you're a rural county, for instance, that is very much embedded in the political economy of the Republican Party and has what looks like could become a white elephant. Of course, you're going to want to fill it with people from the city who are your political opponents anyways, and also are doubly good brown. Perfect. Why not? There really is a very strong political economy story to tell with all this.
By the way, I looked up hotels in the Bunker Hill area, which is near Kokomo. $58 a night for a hotel.
Is there a continental breakfast at least with that too?
I'm sure there is.
So we've got these things that are tremendously expensive. And to George's point about political economy, one of the other attributes of this, and this is something that is actually been litigated somewhat recently, is that bodies in your jail, in your congressional district, count towards the population for your congressional district, which is good. We want that under some circumstance. But it means that, if you have a big prison full of people who cannot vote, that is increasing your voice in the political system just by virtue of them sitting next to a bunch of red voters. It's kind of a tough nut to crack. The various solutions to that are often worse than the problem. You don't want to be in a position where you're denying representation to cities because they have more non-citizen population. But it creates some really perverse incentives at the margin, particularly for places where anything that's happening on a per capita basis, any kind of dispersal that's happening on a per capita basis is important to the local economy. And of course, the prisons themselves are big immobile capital. Those are expensive buildings that you can't move. So you've got kind of the same Rust Belt story, right? Where you have these job centers that cannot easily be relocated piecemeal. Like either you can break them down entirely and put them back together someplace else, or you can just kind of let them chug on, but you can't slash employment by 50% and still have that be something that makes sense financially.
My friend Guillermo Raditi used to say that every car that gets produced will be sold. Doesn't matter what car price or what price it transacts at, it's going to get sold. When you have fixed assets that need to be utilized, they will be utilized. And the question is, how do you go about doing that? In the auto industry, that looks like it's a really good time to buy a car when no one's buying cars because prices are really low. When it comes to detaining people, it's a very different proposition because it's not a market at work. It's the monopoly on force being deployed against people.
The part that's a little challenging with the immigration space on this is good chunks of the operation internally in these facilities is done by the immigrants themselves at $1 a day salaries. So, the laundry, the health, not the healthcare, excuse me, the like food service, the like cleaning is all typically, at least in these larger facilities, is all done by the migrants as part of the voluntary work program in which they are offered $1 per day for an 8-hour shift. And, they're often desperate because they don't have money on their commissary in order to make calls out to buy things, because the food service is inadequate, what have you. And so it is created this where these facilities exist, and certainly, understandably, they're viewed as potentially an employer or a significant employer. But the truth often is quite more complicated and less profound for the local community, at least in the immigration space. I don't know in other carceral sort of settings.
So tell us some good news, Mark.
Tell you some good news. You brought someone in who does immigration stuff. You want good news?
Well, we're in the unique and unfortunate position right now where opportunities for the good guys to have the ball exist at the state level, and they maybe exist at the level of appellate litigation. And that's essentially it. We're not going to get anything good out of the administration. We're not going to get anything good out of the legislature right now. These are the very, very few opportunities we have to try to change the legal landscape so that things are a little better than they were before. Is there anything you guys have going that you think is promising, that you think is going to move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think this issue that I was mentioning regarding mandatory detention. I mean, that has been, again, I don't think it's been really, it's a little complicated, but it has been the ball game for this administration during the first year. This has been it's the most important tactic that they had. And that issue is slowly percolating to the appellate level. We just had a case. It's in a little bit of a different posture, but we just had it at the Seventh Circuit in the consent decree that I was talking about. That issue came up there as well. And the Seventh Circuit agreed with us. that their interpretation of their detention authority is incorrect. That issue has just been a final judgment in a nationwide class action out of the Central District of California in a case called Maldonado Bautista, which is kind of it's coming up the rear, but kind of the class action that's pushing this issue forward just reached a decision at the district court and will be at the Ninth Circuit soon. And it's percolating in multiple circuits at this point that I have to believe it will be in one form or another before the Supreme Court soon. And, I mean, it's a high stakes in the sense of if they don't agree with us, then we're really in need of some sort of statutory change, because it will effectively mean every immigrant who gets arrested is subject to mandatory detention. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that their theory makes no sense, as 300 district court judges have now agreed. And so, I mean, it will bring us back to what the status quo was. But I think what's fundamentally important from the purpose of like a mass deportation strategy is if all these individuals are eligible for bond, they're going to get out. They're going to be on a slower track. They're going to be able to get attorneys. They're going to be able to be with their families. That really is going to blunt the ability for the shock and awe aspect of it. So I think that's the most important one from like a practical level of immigration enforcement. I think the Alien Enemies Act, I'm really, while we were very concerned about that being one of the big tools, it's kind of proved to be more of a very egregious but spectacle tool so far, particularly the CPOT situation, which was just absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
I think we feel cautiously optimistic that we're going to win on that one at the Supreme Court.
Just to jump in, we've talked a little bit about the Alien Enemies Act here before, but this is the doctrine that's coming out of the Trump administration that is describing people who are allegedly gang members as and who are allegedly in the United States illegally. As we've discovered, they have deported people under this authority that were neither, but that describes them as invaders and therefore applies the Alien Enemies Act as the deportation authority to get them out of the country. That's a novel legal theory that has not been used by past administrations except in times of actual clear no shit war. But it's something that's been advanced, and as Mark said, it was a major concern that this is something that SCOTUS would buy.
I need to come up with a musical cue for every time Proctor cheerfully cuts in to tell us about something horrific.
We'll do the NBC The More You Know thing, but on a kazoo or something.
Right. I'll go print a kazoo.
So, and birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit reading the tea leaves more than anybody else, but when this issue, it was not up because they purposely chose to only deal with the idea of universal injunctions, this idea that like whether one case from one district court can block a policy nationwide absent a class action. It seemed from what the justices say that there's enough votes there to maintain the status quo. And, I think that's like one of, not only from like a justice standpoint, it's like one of the most important tools that for why the United States does not have an ever increasing underclass, because anyone who's here without status, they're that next generation has full membership, has full, and I think is such an important tool for why things don't go completely off the rails in the immigration space.
That makes a lot of sense.
Those are the main ones, I think, as far as what's coming soon. I think the other one is with respect to these large scale enforcement. We've talked a little about the consent decree that we have here as to warrantless arrests and blocking. I think we're going to see that start to roll out quite significantly. There is now an injunction in DC. There's one in Colorado. There's two, one soon to be two in California. I believe a case is going to be filed in Charlotte soon. There may be one in New Orleans soon. I think we're going to see the frameworks of getting these large-scale enforcement operations under, a judicial lens increasingly across the country to hopefully blunt the worst of it.
Speaking of Charlotte, we haven't really returned to it since Bovino rolled out, but I was really astounded at how little effort they put in here after Midway Blitz in Chicago, because Midway Blitz was a very long operation. It was not a couple days. They were done here within a week. It was wild. Like, the community had barely begun standing up the sort of networks that are now very, very functional and doing, incredible work every day in Chicago. We couldn't get whistles shipped here fast enough. Like, it was literally like there were people DMing me on Blue Sky being like, I've got a bunch of whistles. Like, can we send them? And yep, here's who you send them to. And by the time they got them in the mail, Bovino was out. And I think that was so instructive as to what their aims are with these big, large scale operations. Like, yes, they're trying to run roughshod over anyone they can, but they do not have the minerals for an actual siege of a city in the way that I think some of us would fear as kind of the worst case scenario. And they really showed that in Charlotte, because the community did a good job resisting them here, but it was much less intensive than the resistance in Chicago, and they couldn't hack it. They expected it to be a cupcake, and it turned out to be filled with gravel.
Do you think it has anything to do with the location?
Yes.
As far as I'm just curious, I have been really wondering how this sort of operation is going to play out in, albeit quote unquote blue cities, but blue cities in a far more politically diverse, and I guess it's a euphemism for a fair big Republican population. Once they have to see what this looks like.
Yeah, Charlotte doesn't have a very big Republican population. It doesn't. I mean, it did really recently, but now this is as blue as anywhere in Chicago, really. I mean, it's not maybe numerically quite that, but it's deep blue.
I just want to break in to observe that George is a large white man who lives in Charlotte who is wearing a shirt right now that reads Chingala Migra.
That's right. And I wore it to Costco today, too. So listen, Charlotte's got Republicans, but it's got Republicans like Chicago has Republicans, right? There are lots of conservatives in the Chicago suburbs, and the missteps in there was a misstep in Charlotte where they raided a country club, and that appeared to generate backlash up the chain. Whether that was like the specific thing that got them to move on, I can't say. What I will say is geography does appear to be important too, because unlike Chicago, Charlotte is not a grid. It is really easy to get confused moving around here. It is really hard to get direct line from point A to point B. It is really, really hard to move quickly without a lot of people noticing if you've got eyes on you, right? Because everything goes through choke points. Everything is based on Stroads. It's a very, very different layout from the urban grid that most of the Chicagoland is, or at least most of the areas of the Chicagoland they were focused on. So I think that was part of it too. As far as, them doing it in like a purple state or in near areas that are deeply Republican, like you just go across the river into Gaston County and you are in deep, deep red territory. Maybe, but that's not where they were. They were in central Charlotte. Yeah. And there was mass resistance. I mean, the other thing that's interesting, there was video of people standing in parking lots with guns on their hips talking to the officers being like, what are y'all doing here? There was one guy who was talking to, I think it was a CBP team, and he was open carrying and he had pistol on his hip, and the other one of the agents was escalating while putting his hand on his gun. The federal officer had his hand on his gun, and the guy who was taking the video, who was open carrying, is saying, well, if you're going to put your hand on your hip, I'm going to put my hand on my hip. And it was wild that this guy didn't get shot. Like, honestly, it was wild. He was fully saying, like, I am about to move my hand towards my gun to a federal officer who was escalating the situation and already had his hand on his gun. Now, I will say, like,
video is a powerful thing.
It is the lesson here is we need to do more open carry here in Chicago.
I don't think that's the takeaway I would have with it. But what I think one of the reasons it lasted so short is that they realized it was not easy pickings because of the geography. They realized they were creating collateral damage that was coming back to them up the chain. They realized that this was not a docile population by any means, and that doesn't necessarily mean one that is constantly open carrying. I haven't seen someone open carrying in Charlotte in like over a year. It's not super common down here. Again, we're a blue city. People here don't open carry, but they have the right to under state law in ways that are a little more complicated than in Chicago. So, you run into this series of things, and I think that was so I say all that to say that it doesn't take much to really gum up the works for these guys. It really doesn't. And I think that's important to keep in mind wherever you're encountering these people, wherever they are, whatever tactics they're using. It's surprisingly easy to make their lives really difficult. And again, they just don't have the minerals to do the hard work here, I think. Either from a legal procedure perspective or in terms of the actual on the ground, like how do we go about executing a raid perspective. They're lazy.
I mean, yes, they don't, there is not how do you complete a raid here. I mean, I think one of the things that was fascinating, particularly with Bovino once Bovino got, was the use of drones. There was a ton of drone activity. I would at night, I would be getting thousands of signal messages a day. And at night, there would just be, we are just hear humming of drones over our neighborhood. And this would be, little village, like these like historic immigrant or Hispanic neighborhoods. And I have to guess what they were doing was taking pictures of people's license plates and faces, but we haven't figured it out yet. But their use of technology to create lists of potential targets is something I hadn't seen quite on this level, these like real time operations, in a urban environment like this, where they were literally punching in people's license plate from their car and able to pull up the person's name, their registration, and then have that information checked against their immigration, incomplete, but immigration records that they have. And so, I mean, they were kind of generating day after day lists of people by just going out into the community, as far as I could tell. And then, basically stopping people, not only because of what type of employment they appeared to be doing, but also like, did they look the wrong way at us? Or did it look like they were trying to walk away quickly and then using that as pretext to stop them for all the reasons that, the Supreme Court indicated might be.
They actually went so far as to shut down civilian drone traffic in Chicago.
Yes.
Under an FAA decree for 10 days in October, which I know got a lot of attention from the drone community at the time. So this is definitely something that we'll have to watch out for as they try to replicate that playbook elsewhere. Is that something you noticed in Charlotte, George?
No. I mean, there were drones active, there were helicopters active, but at that scale, they weren't even here for a week. So getting that sort of stuff set up was not. Now, I'm sure they were using flock cameras. I'm like without doubt, and we may have to do a segment on them at some point. Very, very bad, evil company. Do not ever have a flocking camera installed where you live. It is terrible.
No
just
flock,
really,
no
really
ring.
bad.
Oh,
Yep. Same with Ring. I think Flock's worse, but Ring is similar. Just don't do it. My neighborhood that I live in has a plate reader up front, but it's on our own server. Like it's not a Flock camera, and we had a Flock camera and it got swapped out. And I am very, very happy about that, because this stuff should not be available to federal law enforcement without a warrant. Like there's no reason. And yeah, so I'm sure they were using those solutions, but it wasn't the sort of pervasive environment you're describing, Mark, at all. And again, urban geography, right? Like Charlotte is much more spread out. If they were using that on the east side, I wouldn't know about it at all up where I am on the northwest side because it's a big spread out city. There were pretty limited reports. I did see some reports of drones and some reports of helicopter activity, but it was limited, and because they were here so short, it just.
So, Mark, what can we and the listeners of Normal Men do to help the situation in Chicago? What can we do to back you up?
Our organization is the National Immigrant Justice Center. Our website is immigrantjustice.org, or the other would be, I would say, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They run both the hotline, but also all the other sort of social services to help both the immigrant community, but also just the rapid response networks. Like, in order to have rapid response networks, you have to have gas money. So even stuff as simple as, donating to those sorts of efforts. Both the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, the National Immigrant Justice Center, and then the other would be the Organized Communities Against Deportation, which is the, really on the ground organizers of the various rapid response networks, and really have been totally instrumental in kind of changing how we do litigation and how we do our effort at the policy and in litigation, just because of just how dedicated they have been to, Chicagoans they don't even know.
We will absolutely put links to all of those in the show notes. And I know that because we have 3 separate people editing the Google Doc as we record this, and we have lists of each of those organizations in 2 different sections of the doc. So we are on it, folks. Those are going to be in the show notes.
What else am I going to do but say things that will get us on a list?
There we go. We are all on a list, I think, at this point. Mark, thank you so much for coming on Normal Men. This has been great. And thank you for the work that you do in protecting folks that need all the help they can get in the face of what the Trump administration has been doing. It's wonderful work, and we hope you continue to do great things with it.
Appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation.
So about open carrying. No.
See, George raised the point about the city setup and it not being a grid. Ed and Proctor, y'all with your Yankee cities that are like organized and stuff. See, there's advantages to the mass chaos we operate development in the South.
I'm sorry, did you just describe Boston as a grid-based city?
He did.
I guess, that's true. Boston's
so,
not.
Okay, here's the thing. We have grids. We have several of them. None of them are connected. You go to Back Bay, there's a grid. You go to South Boston, there's a grid. The rest of it, wilderness. I guess Cambridge has a grid, but they don't count. They're educated people.
And
No.
DC,
And
of
this
course,
is probably...
famously a triumph of French design. So,
I was going to say,
DC,
speaking of French design, like
DC, one city, the city designed by the one Frenchman who didn't understand urban planning.
well, no, that's the thing. Like, they completely redesigned Paris to avoid the whole staging a revolution in the streets thing, and we forgot that lore when we built the Sun Belt, and we're now primed for just wildly uncontrollable cities with no grids and no easy way to move around. And I think the Trump administration is going to get urbanism pilled over this. I think it's happening.
Yeah, so to be clear, the official position of Normal Men is that we are now endorsing Stroads, open carry, and ideally having Republican country clubs in your home city. But
we are fully on board with Operation Everything is Atlanta 2100.
I mean, like there's advantages and disadvantages of doing things different ways. And honestly, it had not occurred to me that the Stroads would be a problem for ICE. So that's interesting.
Yeah, Charlotte is one of these amazing feats of engineering because if you take every city and you map the average direction of streets, most cities fall into something like a plus sign or an X, right? There's some large percentage of streets that are on some kind of grid. And there's this great infographic that does the rounds every once in a while that has, New York isn't, it's sort of a 2X thing because Manhattan is off kilter from the rest of like Queens and Brooklyn and whatever. And, there's some nuance here.
In many ways.
Charlotte's is a perfect circle. There is no direct line all the way across the city in either direction. You can't do it. It's all circle through roads. And that really does create problems for quickly tracking somebody down or quickly moving people from point A to point B without creating massive attention, because there's only so many ways to do it in any sort of logical point A to point B line, and it's easy to keep track of that. So if ICE is going from into East Charlotte, everyone in East Charlotte knows within 5 minutes, and it's shut down. And the locks are on the doors of all the bodegas, and people are not leaving their apartments, and oops, all your targets are gone. So I do think that played a role in why they had such a hard time here.
I do want to, because I will get messages about this, amend something I said a moment ago. I'm sorry, South Boston is 2 separate grids.
Important.
Yes.
Yeah. The Southie listeners will get on you for that sort of thing.
You do know
it's
that
true.
they know where I live.
Well, that's on you, man.
Yeah, my OPSEC is not strong.
What are the 2 separate grids? Is there a Southie grid and then like a Dorchester grid?
No. We're just talking about South Boston here. Like, there's just 2 grids.
Oh, okay.
One of them is going like northwest to southeast, and the other is going east-west. They just happen to meet in the middle, and it is Dorchester Street. Yeah,
Dorchester.
Boston's a fascinating place. You should
At least
never
it's
come
not
here.
Roxbury.
1, it's pronounced Roxbury. 2, yes, but West Roxbury's nice, so we contain multitudes.
Or Fackin' Raggles.
All right, since we haven't talked enough about Charlotte on this episode, we're going to talk some more about Charlotte. Well, sort of Charlotte.
Well, George is going to talk about Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Charlotte because I think there is an interesting thing happening in North Carolina's 14th Congressional District. I am not convinced this is going to work, and I am not fully endorsing it, but I think it's interesting, and I think it deserves a little more attention, so we're going to talk about it. Okay, North Carolina 14. So this was a Democratic district in the 2022 midterm because North Carolina had federally imposed fair maps, basically not gerrymandered maps. They weren't super advantageous to Dems, but they were pretty close to fair. So a guy named Jeff Jackson ran, ended up winning, was very high profile in Congress relative to sort of what he should have been because he was very active on TikTok. You might have seen Jeff Jackson on TikTok. He's now the Attorney General in North Carolina as of 2024 because he got gerrymandered out of his seat in 2024 when the maps got thrown out and new unfair maps got put in. Since there has been some tweaking and the maps have gotten even less fair as part of the mid-cycle redistricting process that Trump has pushed, that may turn into a dummy mander. We're not going to talk about that right now, but we will at some point go into dummy manders and why they might apply in North Carolina. Coming back to the North Carolina 14th. So this seat is run by a guy named Tim Moore. Tim Moore was a member of the North Carolina General Assembly and was Speaker for 10 years, from 2015 to 2025. He ended up moving on to Congress after a lawsuit that emerged in 2023 alleging alienation of affection by the spouse of a lobbyist who Tim Moore allegedly pressured into various less than savory activities. Group sex may have been involved. These were all allegations, and I will say the lawsuit was later withdrawn. And so, whether this actually happened or not, we cannot say, but those are the allegations made in the lawsuit. Moore now is the congressman for North Carolina 14. He won that primary in 2024, 55,644 votes to 9,562 votes. So basically he won with 55,500 votes in 2024. Keep in mind, very energized Republican electorate. This district covers under the current maps, basically a semicircle around the western edge of Charlotte, including my house. This is my district. This is one of the reasons I think it's interesting is because it involves me, and I am the, of course, protagonist of reality.
As we know.
It covers that western strip of Charlotte's outer edge and then carries west, and it includes Huntersville, which is the suburb north of Charlotte. It includes Cornelius, which is just north of Huntersville, and then it includes a bunch of rural counties to the west, including Gaston County, which is very red and very suburban, and then pushes out all the way to the mountains. Okay, so he won with 55,000 votes. Jeff Jackson, the Jeff Jackson was at that point moving on to run for AG. Pam Gannant, I think is how you pronounce her name, won that primary on the Dem side with 20,000 votes. Okay. So what we have in NC14 for 2026 is a woman named Kate Barr running as a Republican. She is a Democrat. She is not a Republican. This is not someone who was a Democrat and is switching parties a la Tricia Cotham, another Mecklenburg County elected official who was a true Democrat who switched parties after getting elected to sustain the supermajority in the North Carolina State House for the Republican Party.
There are so many layers of beef going on here. I need a flowchart.
Yeah, this is very different from that. I just wanted to mention that. We can come back to Tricia Cotham at some point.
Wasn't Tricia Cotham also like maybe banging Tim Moore, or am I conflating sex scandals here?
I'm going to choose my words very carefully here.
Okay.
It sounds true to me.
We'll delete this.
We don't have to delete this. We can absolutely leave this in. I have no opinion on what you just said. Okay. So Kate Barr is running in the Republican primary. She's doing this because what she's hoping to do is to convince enough either already unaffiliated voters who do not register as Democrats, and Democrats switching to unaffiliateds to vote for her in the primary of the Republican Party. In North Carolina, you can run as in whatever primary you want, and it's an open primary. So if you're not an affiliated member of the other party, you can vote for that person. The thinking here is that people might be pissed off enough that a large number of Democrats could re-register as unaffiliated, or a large number of unaffiliated voters could vote in the Republican primary and put her over the top against Moore. Again, to do this, she would need roughly 55,000 votes. Maybe it's a non-presidential year, so it might be a slightly lower number. She may pick up a few Republican votes as well, so maybe she needs 50K. It's the math is kind of hard to pencil down, but in the neighborhood of 50K votes. That's a big ask, but it's an interesting theory because the reason she's running this campaign is to highlight that the only competitive election for that seat is in the primary. There is no competitive general. Now, this is also true about the seat of Alma Adams, who is my former rep and is the Democrat who represents Central Charlotte, of course. But, it's true both ways. Under gerrymandered maps, you have to have a competitive primary if there's ever going to be any question about who represents your district in Congress. So I wanted to highlight all that. I wanted to highlight what a weird dude Tim Moore is and just why is this guy in Congress. I wanted to highlight that Charlotte politics actually can be interesting. And I wanted to highlight this sort of approach to winning a uncontestable election by contesting the primary. And I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about whether this strategy could be used more widely than just NC14 in 2026.
So this only works when you have open registration for primaries, right? So like that's one initial
Correct.
gating factor on it. Like you have to be able to cross over to have any chance of being able to bum rush the opposing party's primary to get your guy in.
Yeah. Now I don't know all the different states. Like you need an open primary where it's easy to convince a Democrat, or should be relatively doable to convince a Democrat to register as unaffiliated and then re-register as Democrat. It's a lot harder to do that if you're asking them to register as a Republican. I think that's like way too big of an ask, right?
Right.
So yeah.
I don't know if any well-intentioned plan could get me to register as a Republican.
This is what I'm talking about, yes.
Yeah. That just takes a level of coordination that I don't think you're going to see in what is definitionally a low blue population for a red district. That said, you're also going to need some kind of unusual district dynamics, right? Like you're going to need essentially a gerrymandered district where you have a blue anchor to have that kind of coordination attached to a much larger red district, which I believe is what's going on in NC-16. That you've got a piece of Charlotte that's bright blue attached to a larger red washout. Is that?
Yeah, you've got a slice that's blue, and I'm not sure what the exact percentage of the population is that's in Charlotte, but it's in the last election in 2024, he won this 58-42. So it's a pretty healthily red district. I mean, R+16 that's a big ask.
Yeah. So and it is that way because they use that to crack part of the urban core for Charlotte.
They packed the urban core, and so Alma Adams' district is the urban core. It's the packed district, and then this is the cracked district. Yes.
Right. So like you've got bits of bright blue that have a very Charlotte identity that are attached to a whole bunch of ruralia. And this is something where you might be able to get coordination in that Charlotte bright blue. If you had a more distributed blue population through the district, that would be harder. Like what you need is you need something where you have a carve out, a clip out of essentially a city. And these are conditions that exist lots of places, because this is one of the ways that you gerrymander is you take a bright blue piece of a city and you attach it to 300 miles of country. And that gives you a Republican net district, because you've got extremely red rurals attached to a small piece of extremely blue center city. It's kind of the same dynamic that we saw in Tennessee in the special the other month, where you had this one Democratic hardpoint that by itself was almost pulling this very red district into competitiveness. So you need something like that to make it work. You need something where there is a geographic and political locus for blue voters to coordinate.
Reference also, statewide, we have a lot of registered independents, 2.97 million registered independents versus 2.3 each Republicans and Democrats. So you do have an unusually large voter pool that is registered independent. In Gaston County, which is, again, the red suburban district, it's rural / exurban really, but semi-suburban, semi-exurban county directly west of Charlotte across the river. They have 57,000 unaffiliated voters, 62,000 Republicans, 40,000 Democrats. So there really are a lot of unaffiliated voters in North Carolina. Like more than a third of the electorate typically is unaffiliated. So if you're pissed off and you're the kind of person that's pissed off and voting in a primary, even without people unaffiliating from the Democrats and then reaffiliating after the fact, that's kind of, it could work. I don't know. We'll see. I certainly think it's novel, and it would be hilarious if Tim Moore lost this way.
I mean, like it's. I mean, by all means, take a shot, right? Like you're not winning this through normal means otherwise, and you're not giving up very much to take the shot.
Yep.
So I think that generally, like, doing unorthodox things with party ID is not a terrible idea for Team Blue to pursue in places where the Democratic brand is very weak. And this isn't that exactly. This is trying to play the cuckoo strategy of laying your eggs in somebody else's nest. But to the extent that it works, it's great. To the extent it doesn't, we weren't taking out Tim Moore anyway.
It also is an interesting example of the wine moms getting truly pissed off, because Kate Barr is by any possible definition a wine mom, and it kind of rules to see someone going to this much trouble just to be a bee in someone's bonnet.
I absolutely approve of how much of a hater she is being, but like,
I mean, this has tremendous student government energy, right? Like this is laudatory.
I don't know. Like, I'll be honest. Yes, this all pencils out the way you've described it, but this runs a very real risk of handing Rush Limbaugh things. Like, and you under no circumstances should hand it to Rush Limbaugh. Like Operation Chaos, but Blue is certainly a. I'm gonna need to sit with that one for a minute.
I mean,
okay, I'm okay with it. There, we're good.
Yeah, desperate times, desperate measures, right? Like, it's hard when you've been gerrymandered out of the political process, and
Absolutely,
you know,
yeah, no, go eat them. It's fine.
I still haven't decided whether I'm gonna unregister as a Democrat or not. I'm a registered Democrat in North Carolina, and don't look that up because I don't want you people looking at my home address. But and yes, I'm not kidding. In North Carolina, if you have someone's name and county, you have their home address if they're registered to vote, which is
that's weird.
Not awesome. Don't love that for me. I'm not sure if I'm going to actually do it because I need to check to see if there are other races in state house and judges, et cetera, where I might want to vote in the Democratic primary. TBD, but it's nonetheless interesting. If you are in NC14 with me, your deadline to change to unaffiliated is February 6th. So if you're considering this, you have a bit of time, but not that much time.
See, like in DC, we have, I want to say it's 2 seats on the council that are reserved for not Democrats or not the majority party that is the rest of the council.
That's cute.
Wait, really?
Which means that you have, well, you know,
it's inclusive.
Yeah, it means you have these kind of Olympics every so often where you have Democrats who are flipping their registration to independent so that they can run for those seats. Or in this case, we've got a guy who was in one of those seats who's flipping his registration back to Democrat so he can run for mayor as a Democrat. So party ID is what it is, right? Like this is something that is an instrument rather than a straitjacket. And I think that's a healthy way to approach your party registration.
Sure.
I mean, I would do it here. I don't care about any of these judges or any of this bullshit. My people aren't going to win anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say something, but no, you're right.
Like, fuck it. I'll register as a Republican. Do it. Go for it.
It is kind of interesting to think about the extreme outcome of all competitive elections being in a primary. Like, if we get, I don't think we're quite at this point yet, but let's imagine we get a little bit further down this road where American elections are so gerrymandered or nationally driven to the point where most states are completely uncompetitive. Then do you see all political activity switch into a party within that state that is dominant? Which is sort of what we've seen in, for instance, New York with the Democrats, right? Like, if you're politically relevant in New York, you have to run as a Democrat. And there were lots of people.
New York's kind of specifically a bad example. Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, Cuomo is a perfect example of this, right? Cuomo's a Republican in a lot of ways.
Well, like I mean, you had the IDC for a long time, which was the splinter faction of Democrats who were caucusing with the Republicans.
But so, that's what I mean, though, right? Like,
but I mean, the upshot of that was that the Republicans had a voice in the legislature. Like it's not like you were drawing dead for political power as a Republican in New York because of the IDC. Now that that's gone,
I would like to register my extreme distaste at being erased from this conversation, living in a state with 134 Democratic members of the House of Representatives and 25 Republicans.
Yes, Massachusetts is a much better example. Like, and you see that in very red states too. That,
you do.
You know, you get kind of like people who want to be in government, but don't necessarily have very, very strong ideological priors.
Yeah, they might be monster okay, but they're not like themselves like growing a third arm yet.
Yeah,
that comes later.
Yeah,
but like,
I guess what I wonder is, like, do we get to a place where voters behave the same way politically motivated, like career motivated politicos react, where you just register as, if you're in a blue state, like a true blue state, you're a Democrat and you register as a Republican, but like that completely uncouples from the national ideology.
It does. Because like I know a lot of Democrats here who are like,
All right, I'm going to stereotype. I know
Oh,
a
boy.
lot of Democrats here who are cops. Okay?
None of those down here, buddy.
Like
Nope.
my street has two flavors of cop, Democrat and Republican. And like you can only tell because some of them have the Trump signs. They all have the back the blue flag on the back of their obnoxiously large vehicles.
Blick the burp.
In fairness, some of them might be firefighters. But yeah, like that's how it is here, right? Like the one weird asterisk here is that occasionally, inexplicably, Massachusetts just elects a Republican governor because Republicans are, as we all know, good at business. Don't interrogate that question nearly as much as I have. But yeah, it's just weird because, like, yes, there is a general election. Why do I vote? It is an honest question because, like, it's locked down in the primary for basically all of this stuff, right? Like Maura Healey, I think, had a Republican opponent. I cannot tell you if you put a gun to my head who it was, and I don't care because they had no chance. But you know.
And I mean, DC's the same way. The Democratic primary is the election.
Yeah.
That you know, whoever wins that is going to win the seat.
Yeah.
See, it's easy for me because it's always just Charlie Crist.
The bipartisan option.
For every office too, oddly enough. Like, how does that
That's
happen?
right. They're never, the Florida Democratic Party is never going to function properly until they finally just put Charlie on the ballot for every office
He might win one.
at the same time.
Look, you miss 100% of the shots. You don't put Charlie Crist on the ballot.
I think I'm going to register as a Republican and run in Florida too.
Sure.
Because the incumbent, Neil Dunn, I think is his name. He's from Boston. He's one of Ed's people.
Sorry.
And I've had a lot of practice ripping on Boston
It's true.
on this show. And Ed can probably help me out on this too.
This is true. But like, I mean, you're in Florida, dude. If you're going to run for office, why don't you just find one of the several representatives who are dead? Like, this seems easier. Just find your nearest geriatric and wait.
I mean, I think it's interesting to see how different states have sort of shifted their own systems in response to both voters and also partisan incentives. So you've got like Alaska is an example of a state that has moved to ranked choice voting, and they have this top four system that narrowly survived the last election, where it's a jungle primary and then it's ranked choice among the top four in the general election, and that produces very different electoral results than a pure primary system in a state like Alaska, where you have a centrist Republican bloc, you've got a quite liberal Democratic Party in places, and you have a psychotically conservative Republican bloc. And the centrist Republicans don't necessarily want to hand power over to the psychotically conservative bloc either. You know, like the ranked choice system favors them. The ranked choice system is a way for them to remove the power of the tyranny of the primary and put that back to where somebody who, looks basically like them, the moderate Republican who in a different state might be a moderate Democrat, has
Metric standard ovoid Republican, yes.
A normal Republican, if you will. That's a system that is operating there and is also operating in Maine for, I think, a lot of the same reasons, to kind of help preserve whatever power centrists have there.
Maine is a fascinating example because it really just exists because everyone hates Paul LePage. Well, it's the power of one man.
I mean, that's fair.
I won't finish that sentence, but libel laws exist, kids.
You guys also employ like 2% of the state population in state government, right?
Because there are only 20 people.
No, but
yeah.
Am I mixing this up? But like the Maine House of Representatives is enormous.
I think. Are you thinking of New Hampshire?
Maybe I'm thinking of New Hampshire. Maybe I'm
New Hampshire has like 500,000.
151 in Maine. Now, that's a lot given the population of the state is like, I think it's at what? Oh, I should know this. 1.3 million? Someone's
Yeah,
gonna
I
look
think
it up
that's
and correct
right.
me. But yeah, like so you're really talking about some honestly very good representation numbers. We should consider that nationally. Just still don't let Paula Page in. But like,
For context, New Hampshire has 400 state representatives.
don't they all work for like an hour a year and get paid $20 though?
Not based on Seth Miller's post at
okay.
wanderme.paxx.arrow on Blue Sky. He's a journalist covering the aviation industry. Really, really great follow. But yeah, he's always posting about them being in session. So he is a New Hampshire state representative, and they do appear to do a lot of work. And there's that's crazy because the population of New Hampshire is what, like 400,000 people?
It's more than that.
It's got to be more than that.
Oh, 1.4. Still, 400 representatives for 1.4 million people is quite a few.
The thing I'm surprised by is like Maine is sneaking up. Like the great empty state of Maine might like pass its much tinier neighbor in like sometime? Question mark?
I just want to bring this to everybody's. I have just learned that the minority leader of the Maine House of Representatives is named Billy Bob Falkingham.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
There's some really good names in there.
He was formerly a Marine, and he pled guilty to criminal mischief and disorderly conduct after throwing a bucket of human feces at other people in 2003. So
look, who amongst us?
Billy Bob Falkingham.
It's giving scion of the old New England family moves to Texas and buys a ranch, but instead he just did that with his name. That's like the only thing that changed. He didn't actually move to Texas. He just changed his name to make it sound like he owned a ranch in Texas.
Scion of the XB. I'm sorry. That joke was the worst joke I've ever told in my life.
I didn't get it, if it helps.
Yeah, stay pure.
All right, I think that's enough of our nonsense for this week. So, from Charlotte, I'm George.
Merry Christmas from DC. I'm Proctor Malone.
Happy holidays from South Florida. I'm low tax speedrun enjoyer.
Giving thanks I'm no longer in Maine. I'm Ed.
Stay normal, y'all.